Welcome back to yet another episode of the World Through An Eye podcast. I'm MyongAhn Sunim here with
Dr. Ruben Lambert.
And we are back with episode some kind of a number. We have recently introduced a little thing, a little bonus thing. We're calling the bonus track.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is out. So do check that out. It's, I think, something to the tune of 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
They will be of varying lengths and topics. And anyway, we've briefly introduced it in the first bonus track episode. It's sometimes little things pop up, little nuggets of a thing that are worth
Rambling about mental
yeah.
rambles.
Yeah, and some of it, maybe a little poetry reading.
I feel like
knows?
it's those little pieces of paper that have those little notes that you just stash, and then you come across, and you're like, "Wow, that was a great tidbit that I must share." Right? Your long lost, forgotten insight that you re-encounter.
I have a collection of those.
Yeah.
Unsanim's thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever desk that we would kind of settle in, whether here at in our conference room is his chair and his seat, and or wherever we're at the school or whatever, he would have some desk somewhere or a little spot, and there are always little bits and pieces of tissue napkins and little scraps of paper and things that he would scrabble things, and they would sit there for a while, and something would pop back into his mind, or a memory or remembrance of something. Oh, I should, this is a thing. And so I would go there and sit in his chair and look at the things that were there for what I thought was too long, because then he would go and just throw it out simply, right? Because it served its purpose. But so I would take those and file them away. So
collect.
Have a file of scraps, in a sense.
The scrap paper vacuum, sucking them up, collecting it.
Yeah, they're they come out of the depths of the mind. Not necessarily some topic triggers it or what have you, or some realization, or So the bonus track, in a sense, that's the kind of idea, in little podcast tidbit form. So today's topic, on the account that we didn't receive this week any suggestions or any questions from the audiences, we mentioned at some point in time that reincarnation would be a good thing to sort of touch upon. And so we are. Here we are, reincarnation. I
think I'll start with a little joke, because you said reincarnation, and it just reminded me of a cool time period where you and I actually were making T-shirts. You remember Cafe Press?
Cafe Press, right?
Right. And one of my favorite shirts was the one that you designed. It was a tombstone, and on it said, "I'll be back."
Right. Yes.
I thought that was a cool shirt.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Summer camp projects.
Yeah.
There's a haven't done it here. I guess we did at one point in time at this location, that is. But we did in the previous locations. We had a little the lighter side, I think, was a part of our billboard, our cork board in the lobby or where have you, and I would stick up little light-hearted things. And one of the little cartoon drawings was of two like soda cans, and they're talking to one another, and one says, "You know, I heard if you're good, you could become siding." Right, for aluminum siding, right? So
get recycled.
And there was like recycling something or other. So that was the idea.
You had another T-shirt. It's a little outdated, but cell phones back in the day had limited amounts of minutes that you could use, right? And then this one company came up with, well, whatever you don't use, you can roll it over to the next month. And you came up with a shirt that said Zen, Z-E-N. And it said, now your minutes roll over into your next life.
Right. That was a magical breakthrough. Yes.
Yeah. That was good.
And remember those days? It was like you had set amount of minutes, and you're kind of nail biting, and so I can't call you until next week.
It was only free nights and weekends too. 3 minutes,
and then they included the nights and weekends, and then it was the rollover thing, and then they came out with the holy grail of unlimited.
Yeah, thank God somebody reincarnated those plans and came up with something better.
And we gasped at the unlimited. Yeah. Evolution,
change,
reincarnation, recycling. This is progress. This is the thing, right? We must remember that these things aren't necessarily present solely in this kind of, let's call it the religious realm. Yeah. In terms of reincarnation, it's. The principle is the Buddha didn't invent any of this thing. This is not a case of a creator who creates the world according to their own likes and dislikes and their own ideas. He's a sort of journalist who observes the reality of things. Some of the reality is beyond what meets the eye and beyond the regular sensory perception, but nonetheless he observes the reality of things and simply reports on it. And if we consider the idea, if we sort of set aside for a moment this idea of this typical reincarnation as a, you die and then you reincarnated elsewhere. But if we look around, I mean, Friday again.
It's everywhere.
We've reincarnated again the whole week, the cyclical thing. We're back to, Friday again. Different week, different month, different year, different this, but yet there's so many differences and uniquenesses in it. And yet at the same time, there's a similarity, familiarity, sameness, all simultaneously. Same and different yet same. And some things very different, some things not so much, some things not at all. And when we consider the conversation between the two aluminum cans, it's the same idea, right? Aluminum's aluminum. It changes form and changes shape. That's the thing. I'm no scientist, but there's some laws of thermodynamics or what have you that with this whole idea of energy is neither created nor destroyed, it just changes form. And there is change, not death, but change to all things. Which coffee is it that is that passes through the intestinal tract of a cat, some kind of a cat, mongoose kind of something or other, and it's this highly coveted, coffee that's basically.
But there's the gorilla thing too that we had to see every year when we took the kids in summer camp to the Bronx Zoo. That famous video, right? They taught all the children that.
Yes. Eats the fruit.
It eats the fruit,
eats
and then
the seeds,
passes through the intestines, and
then poops somewhere, and it's like
a tree is born.
Yeah, and it's like a.
It's fertilizer, natural fertilizer.
Right, like a you buy it in the supermarket with a pot and a little plant. It's all included.
Yeah, food almost has a cycle of reincarnation, right? You eat food, you process it.
Absolutely does.
You poop it out, and then it goes back into we use for fertilizer, manure, right?
Sure.
That went through the system of an animal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a cyclical thing.
It gives you back food again.
It's a cyclical thing, and like we said, there's a thing that remains and there's a thing that changes.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's recycling, whether it's I don't know if we ever assigned it. I had this, when we had the kids programs, I had this project that I stowed away, that I created. There was a Ziploc bag, and the idea was there was a Ziploc bag, and you make a miniature snowman, and you put in a Ziploc bag, and you paste that Ziploc bag to your window pane, and you see it kind of melt and become a thing, and sort of on the account of that, this whole idea of the cycle of water and the kind of reincarnation, in a sense, it's water, right? It's water or vapor or liquid or ice or snow, and it's all water, and it's in one form and another form, and when it's in the snowy form, then you can make a snowman out of it, and it has a shape, and it has a kind of characteristics of the carrot nose and the call buttons and the red scarf and a hat and tree branches for arms and all of that, and you look at it, it's like
shape and form.
There's
at
a
one
silhouette,
time.
right?
And then
there's a silhouette, and you look at it, and initially, instantly we know, a snowman. But then you see a puddle of water, and you don't think, a snowman, right? But it's
everything that made up that snowman
is there
too.
Yeah, so this waterness of water and the essence, the idea of the essence and the expression of it and the manifestation of it.
Wait, and then we have what Unsanem taught us, the story that Nojangnam told him about water and what you're drinking.
Oh,
it's dinosaur pee.
Dinosaur urine, yes.
Dinosaur urine, right? You're drinking dinosaur urine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, so the Buddha, in a kind of journalistic fashion, reports on what's going on, and we have to think about it. And then there are the things, that we pass from one existence and then reincarnate into another. There was, I don't know if you remember, when we were getting our degrees in Buddhist studies, there was a whole thing, and I don't recall what the particulars of it were, but that the term reincarnation was...
I remember. I was thinking about that this morning,
Yeah.
but I couldn't remember the second word.
Well, neither can I.
They were hung up on it. It's not reincarnation.
So it's not reincarnation. It's reanimation
tomato,
or something or other.
Tomato. I mean, you can name it whatever you want. It is what it is.
And this is the kind of academic intellectualization of it, right? It's
rebirth.
It was rebirth, right?
Versus reincarnation.
Maybe that's what it was, right?
Something like that.
On the premise of that,
I mean,
the non-soul principle, and then that if there isn't, then what can reincarnate? So there's it was this whole convoluted, tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, I thought. Right. Anyway, so this that expression of reincarnation, let's say, the big wheel, big wheel, because cyclical in a sense, right? But so this great wheel, this carousel, if you will, we have within it the 6 realms of possibility of where one could reincarnate into. Om Mani Padme Hum, right? And for those of you listening who don't know, this is the 6 realms of reincarnation. 3 are considered higher realms, 3 are considered the lower realms, so 3 are more favorable, and 3 less favorable. And so what we have is the heavenly realm, the usually
everybody wants that one.
Everybody wants that. Remember that song? And we're going somewhere, and a song comes on the radio, and There's a sort of blues thing, and the lyrics I remember were, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
Nobody's lining up to be first.
And you know, and it's those, you know, these nuggets of people say things, and things are so profound. They could come out of anywhere. A child, whatever. We'll talk about it some other time, but there's certainly that when the Buddha nature speaks, you know, in between the words of the conscious mind. But yeah, so we have the heavenly realms, and we're not going to dive into the details of the numbers and et cetera, because they're, you know, within the Buddhist cosmology, if you want to call it that. And
that could be another podcast potentially, right, where we go into that.
And there isn't a single realm, heavenly realm. There are multitudes.
There are many rooms in my Father's house.
Right, and that's essentially that, right? If the universe is the Father's house, and there are many rooms in it. And so we have the heavenly realm. Everybody is oogling. Then we have the asura, and the asura are sort of divine in a sense. They're evolved,
right?
But they
have a very strong ego.
They have a very strong ego, and they're argumentative and fighting. Yes. And you know, let's just go through them. We'll organize this perhaps somehow. Maybe it'll come out organized in the end. But so they're kind of evolved and say essentially spiritually, and you know, they're divine being, if you will, or heavenly being, if you will, and but they are in fact rather angry at things and fightful. And then we have the human realm. Right, which is this grand university setup.
I feel like it's like Penn Station. All flow into this one central.
Yeah, we could say that. It's, you know, it's a 50-50 of 50 kind of. It's a equal distribution of joy and suffering. Right,
night and day.
That yang, right? These dualities and things. And largely the idea is, right, learn you some, right? But it is also the world of greed and desire, want, yokke, right?
Yeah, because if you think about it, everything that is alive must, by definition, consume something.
Right.
It must consume. Or another way that we put it is everything is pulling.
Everything's pulling. Yeah.
Here.
Everything's vacuous here. And we don't necessarily, when by consume, we don't only mean food.
No.
Obviously, somebody's consuming this podcast. Yeah. Hopefully, when we're done with it. Also, you know, if you went out to a fine restaurant, and by fine doesn't necessarily mean expensive, and you found something that was scrumptious and delicious, wouldn't you invite your other friends?
Sure.
Wouldn't you say, hey, listen,
I found this
I've
wonderful.
consumed this delicious meal. I think you'd like it. So consumption of food and consumption of the podcast too. Tell others, hey, if you like it, maybe others will like it. Maybe they'll get something out of it. So
spread the word.
Sure. Spread the word. Indeed. Yeah, everything's consuming. Our eyes and ears and nose and every sense is just vacuuming the world inside. Yeah. And unbalanced and unbridled, it is then the fundamental source of suffering.
Yeah.
And pain, disappointment, etc., etc. So, yeah, but here we are, human beings. Learn you some. And then we have the animal realms. So, you know, naturally the Chukseng and made the animal lovers of the audience not get all worked up about it. But the animal realms are considered, in a sense, lower than the human realms. The capacity and we see the behaviors of animals. So many now on social media, various species of animals. Some, dog helping a cat helping a mouse, and those kind of cute things.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't to say that animals are something,
Well, I think if someone heard you say lower, and the first thing that popped into their mind means, oh, that means now you can mistreat them.
Right.
And that was a little Rorschach test where you projected that onto the situation, right? It's a biological fact that animals' ability to engage in complex cognitive thinking is less than humans.
Right.
Doesn't mean
unless you're a crow or a pig or a dolphin.
There are things that they
right.
can do, right?
Up to a certain age.
But I don't see any animals inventing a rocket ship or a cell phone or anything like that.
Right.
Or learning 5 different languages, creating a flux capacitor to make a time machine or anything like that, right? They're just not doing that. So that's just a fact. You still have to, live within the bounds of, let's say, respecting living beings.
Sure.
We don't abandon that. Just because someone knows less than you don't step all over them, right? So we're not saying that. We're just discussing the reality, like a weatherman reporting it, right?
Yeah. And I've recently, I think perhaps a few Sundays ago, or maybe it was meditation class, I forget now. I spoke on the idea of life. What is life? And we do view everything through our own individual lens, right? So if it's not doing what I'm doing, precisely, exactly, if it's not mimicking me, if it's not what my ego says, then it's not alive. And the definition of what it means from the sort of enlightened perspective, what life means, what is alive, is a whole different thing. St. Francis of Assisi was famously fond of rocks, and he would kind of say, don't kick them around, and don't, they are our brothers, and tend to them as one ought to things around us. So we're absolutely not saying that lower, and again, this is also not even if you consider kind of, this is just an image, but a demonic thing, right? A demon, and usually we've been trained by the Hollywood to you cast it down and you smite it and you destroy it and you kill it in this kind of violent thing. The Zen way is not so.
Exactly.
Compassion for all, care for all. This is a whole other thing. But anyway, so but here we are. So we have the animal realms, and animals are limited in their certain capacities that they possess. And then we have Agi, the hungry ghost realm. And sort of is what it says, but we have to be cautious to classify hungry in that sort of natural way as hungry for breakfast. Oh, it's the grumpy ones that haven't had breakfast. If you haven't had coffee, you're a hungry ghost because you're grumpy and you're snarly,
angry and so
right. It's hungry ghosts are those who have been so to the bone consumed by hunger. In other words, by insatiable hunger. In other words, by greed, uncontrolled greed. And so hungry doesn't necessarily and only mean hungry for food. Hungry for love is hungry. Hungry for fame is hungry. Hungry for money is hungry. Hungry for
material
companionship, for emotional states. Hungry to be understood is hungry. Hungry not to be misunderstood or to be not understood, to be just stupid, understood and not understood. Hungry for whatever. Hungry, just insatiable hunger, right? That nothing fills it, and this bottomless pit of a thing, and we know people can become so consumed. I mean, what's
the metaphor for it, right? I think they have a long neck that looks like, let's say, like a straw, and then a very large
I would
stomach.
say watch out with the use of the word metaphor.
Well, just so people understand, conjure up an image of what you're describing.
A mouth of a sort of crocodile or a hippo, a throat the size of a needle, and a belly the size of sort of cows. Not cows have multiple stomachs, it's a different, but this huge distended belly of hunger and thing. But I prefer the imagery. I mean, this is one, and they are. Well, we're gonna get into something here now. There are agi. There are various. Okay. I just realized.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
We didn't start the timer, so I'm gonna have to make a beep at some point in time. So let's keep an eye on the time. I don't even know what time we started. This is gonna be an experiment. I'd like to think, or I like to explain it to people in a sense of whether it's the Dharma guardians or the Shinjung, right? And you could say the Bodhisattvas, you could say the Buddhas, you could say whatever. Think of it in parallel terms to our reality that we are familiar with. We have animals in this world. Some have long necks and are spotted, like the giraffes. Some are underwater, some are flying, some see, some have multiple eyes.
Some don't have a neck.
Some don't see, some don't have a neck, some right. So it's various species of beings, right? Of which all we call kind of living beings, we could say, right? Or animal realm, or insects, whatever. The spiritual dimensions, or the dimensions, or the realms, the worlds, the places where these other beings live, we could think of it in the same thing. It's a parallel in a sense. So there are then various types or species of agi also. What does that mean? That they are satiated by different things. The way that in our world, one animal eats one type of food or one type of fruit, or what kind of, and it can't, it's not equipped to digest something else, for example, or get sick if it does, or what have you. Agi, the hungry ghosts, and in their various species of them, have the same idea, right? So there are ones, and they, there's some what we would consider gross and disgusting eating habits of agi. I mean, they are sad if we consider it. The question of their knowledge and understanding of their condition, that's a whole other thing. But there are ones that, in the least disgusting format, can eat food, but food must be offered to them. Right? So it's there's a restriction, and the restriction is that the food must be specifically offered to them. And again, this is, when we think of it, and we rifle through our life experience, and then we say, well, I don't know, this kind of seems far-fetched. I mean, I remember clearly as a child, there were moments of moments. Let's call them. There were moments of the absence and hunger on the account of the socio-economic situation of Poland at the time, and single-parent household and all those things, and you kind of, as a kid, you almost, like in the movies, you're kind of glued to the window pane of a bakery, and you could nearly lick the glass at a steaming piece of food, on the other side of it. So it's there, but you can't have it unless it's given to you or unless offered to you. And in that case, how do you get it? You have money and you buy it, and that's how you get it, right? Agui don't have money, so the money, in a sense, is the prayer and the offerings that are made by the living on behalf of the Agui, the hunger ghosts, that kind of thing. And then that spectrum, then progressively deteriorates. There are Agui who can only satiate their hunger by the water that drips off the feet of a pious sort of person, or usually it's presented as kind of monks, but as the water that drips off the feet of a let's say of a moral person, of a good person who has crossed a body of water. So if you walked across a creek and your feet are dripping water, those drips of water is the only thing that could satiate the hunger of a certain species of Agui. And then there are ones that, pardon me, graphic warning for the listeners, that feed on vomit. But they eat the vomit, they vomit the vomit again because whatever, and then they could, it's a cyclical thing. So this torment. And when we look at our lives here, when one gets caught up in a insatiable hunger, I mean, consider addiction and drugs.
Yeah.
Right. People. The initial, use is, oh, that feels great, and then the use feels like, oh, that's all right, and then the use is, that's and then the use is, I'm sick, so I must use, and then the use is you use, and then you don't even have a chance to enjoy the use because you already have to start planning for where you're gonna get your next fix, because the cyclic. So it's progressively deteriorates into the cyclical thing. What's that guy? Sméagol. Right. I mean, Sméagol. I don't know the story of the history of it, and the movie buffs and the religious personnel of the said saga don't throw rocks at me, but I would say that Sméagol, whatever, Sméagol. I think it's Sméagol. Anyway, that Sméagol was a person at one point in time, and I don't know if that's a story, but this is my own thing. A healthy, normal size, normal looking person.
You're talking about the Lord of the Rings, no?
The Lord of the Rings, right. Yeah. So in my version of the role, Sméagol is a person, a normal person like you and I, that then develops this infatuation with this ring of his.
The ring, right. My precious.
His precious, right? and where I think every other word, he's like, how's your day? Oh, it was fine, whatever. My precious, and just snaps back to that fixation. And the state in which Sméagol is presented in the movie is the result of that greed deteriorating and kind of contorting and deforming him into this creature that he now is, right? Hairless and big gouging eyes because looking for the thing, and kind of grotesque reduction of a human being to a creature of greed. That is an Agui who's been reduced from a human form into this creature thing. Betrayal is just norm. Nothing higher than the holy god of greed and the holy god of ring, that kind of thing. And so we have those, and we are then down to the lowest of the realms, which is the hell realms, the least favorable, of which there are a number. Again, it's not right, and it's not only one. There are different strokes for different folks. Hot hells, cold hells, you name it, we got it. Man. And so those are the realms, and the premise is, depending on the karmic burden, we create a magnetic pole. Again, this idea really is not that difficult to grasp if you consider habituation of thought and emotion and behavior. How is a woman subject to abuse finally free herself from said, and this is necessarily not only women, men are in abusive relationships as well, right? But so how does a person then in an abusive relationship, having freed themselves of said abuser, go and find another relationship that is exactly the same personality that they are engaged in? They still have the scarring and the emotional scarring, and sometimes the physical scarring, and the abuse still kind of there, but then they go and seek out of the whole availability of the various personality types, and how is it that
narrow
they
in on the
hone
same
in
behavioral profile as the last abuser?
Right. So it's as if they are possessed by their karmic proclivities and their tendencies. It sort of pulls them, and they're kind of in the back seat of it, being just pulled into this relationship yet again of the same kind, right? Not an easy task to unbind oneself. This is this thing, this karmic magnet that pulls, and if we populate the mind with a certain thing, and we get this whole magical formulae of the confirmation bias, and these familiarity, and the devil known is better than the devil unknown, right? And all of those things that we have, right? And then what you're going to do is, whether you like it or not, maybe actually it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. That's even the sadder thing there. You may like it or not like it, and I don't like it, and yet whether you like it or not, it doesn't really matter. You are magnetically drawn and pulled. Unbeknownst to you, you will find yourself in the same place,
and then feel as if there's no way out and no escape.
Right. And you have arrived there. No one really abducted you and drove you into a situation, into a relationship. But you find yourself in this relationship.
Pulled into it.
Pulled in magically, right? And a sort of this idea of how the hell did I end up here is completely outside of the thought pattern, whether it's some magical horse blinds that come, veil the eyes, and the person doesn't see the warning signs and whatever. But by and large, there isn't sufficient wakefulness in the mind of what's happening here and now, what's happening to me as I'm being drawn, and so we get sucked in. It's very easy to understand this dynamic of being drawn into a realm in this very life. And so, we have the advantage of having the physical form, right? Because it takes, from me to get from here from this room to the next room, it takes some time. I have to drag. There's some, heaviness to the body, and there's, air resistance. So maybe I have 1,700 times ability to change my mind. But if I was untethered from this physical form, and the thought, I want to be in the next room, occurs to me, immediately I am there, right? So there's not even the delay that affords me,
time to think, time to process,
rethink it,
maybe change directions.
Just boom, you're in. Yeah. And so these ideas are not as far-fetched as we sometimes think them to be, if we just think a little bit about it. And if we consider our lives and the way that things are, they are absolutely make sense. because we see it in day-to-day life. And so this is the one element of this reincarnation, the grand wheel of reincarnation from one life to another, in a sense. By the way, it's worth mentioning and necessary to mention just how uniquely fantastic, unimaginably so, despite the situation and the condition and whatever that human life is. I know this is sometimes met with some contention and say, well, there are people who suffer unimaginably in this life. And we are by no means suggesting that ought to be dismissed. But there are sufferings beyond the unimaginable sufferings. And they are so because they are unimaginable, because we've forgotten the experience. We certainly have. The chances are we've been through the various realms and again, and we've forgotten this thing of those because there's a reset button, in a sense, when we come into this world, the trauma of the birth. And so
then alternate control delete happens, and
right,
all the memories are gone.
Yeah, and then they are restored when we drop the physical form, right? And so yes, and so we have this imagery, and I don't recall if we mentioned it here on a podcast, but this uniqueness of the human form and just how precious and unique. I mean, we are a minority in this world. If you consider all the living beings, animals and birds and fish and creepy crawlies and all of this, we are just utter sheer sort of minority.
Yeah, we probably took like a 12-foot by 12-foot cut out of the dirt underneath us and dug it all up and went straight down.
There are more.
The amount of living things down there are probably more than
more than the whole population of all. No, population of Earth.
Yeah.
So, and this is not even getting into the nitty-gritty of what is life, period. But and so this imagery of a blind turtle.
Oh yes.
Right, swimming in the vast ocean, on the surface of which there floats a plank. And in the plank there's a single hole. And so you have the turtle, blind. You have the plank with a single hole in it on the surface of this great, great world ocean. And this turtle comes up for air every something to the tune of like 1,000 years. It takes one nice deep breath. It's probably learned it in one of our meditation classes. And then dives again, and then does not come up because it hasn't the need to come up for another 1,000 years. Now, if you consider, I don't know, maybe there's some mathematicians in our listening group. If you consider the ratio, and the possibility and the chance for that turtle to come up for that single breath that happens every 1,000 years. And as it comes up, for it to stick his head through the single hole in that single plank of wood floating on the vastness of the ocean, that is how difficult it is to become a human.
I think Kyung-ho had like the opposite example. Kyung-ho is one of the great Korean Zen masters. He said, imagine all the dirt in the world that represents human beings losing their fortune and losing the human form. And then being able to become a human again would be the amount of dirt under a person's fingernail. So that little tiny bit compared to all the dirt in the whole wide world.
Yeah, so you are a unique and a fantastic thing despite of what the circumstances of one's life are. And furthermore, just how precious one is on the account of that uniqueness is unspeakable. There's only one of you in this world, whoever you are, wherever you are. No one is like you. Twins. We have a twin. We have twins in our sangha, and it's interesting. They're twins. Each individual person is a person of their own, uniquely shaped by their experiences, by their life, whatever. Their beauty is their own individual own. And so we have this great, back to this great cyclical thing.
Yeah, I want to highlight an example that Wayne Dyer gave. He gave like a practical example, because then there's the great cycle of reincarnation, right? Where you go, you lose this body, you lose this form, and then you gain another form, whether it's a form in one of the other realms or returning back here to Earth. And there's some people out there, I have to drop another joke that's yours, so credit MyongAhn Sunim. There are some people who are listening to this right now and are saying, that's a bunch of hogwash. I just don't buy into that. And for those people, we'll have this discussion in our next lives about that.
Yes. So that's a classic of mine. You
can sit with that.
If you don't subscribe to the notion of reincarnation, don't worry about it. We'll talk about it in your next life.
We'll talk about it. Yeah. And so Wayne Dyer, he did a presentation on a stage, and he had a picture of himself every 10 years. And then this is the point that he made. He said, okay, well, it's hard for you to grasp losing this body, getting another body, but we did this within this lifetime. Here's my soul incarnated into this body. And he showed a picture of himself as a baby. And that had a certain shape and form and certain cognitive abilities. And then 10 years later, completely different, a whole brand new body. Right. And then 10 years and so forth and so forth. So yeah, one can say we've reincarnated into different bodies just within this lifetime.
I would go one step back further still, right? And we are within this lifetime an amphibious being.
We were, yeah.
Suspended in the mother's womb.
Yep.
Right? Swimming. We're kind of frog.
We're swimming.
We're a frog thing.
Essentially, yes.
And then we are born into this, air breathing being, and so in a very physical form, we are already two lives and two realms of existence within this single life. And then, like you said, there are these stages of progressive evolution and change and evolution. We could, it's a thing evolves over the course of various lengths of time, and offspring evolves in one way to adapt and accommodate and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's still a thing of the same, its name may still be the same. And its characteristics are varying, and so that's a reincarnation also. I think what we'll do is I will do this. Right? It feels in my bone marrow that we're probably an hour or close to it now.
And this is definitely a topic that we need to return back to.
Well, I think we'll do a part 2.
Internal reincarnation that we didn't really.
So let's do that. So
but I do want to give one story that I do love from one of my favorite presenters. His name is Joseph Campbell, and he gives this story in The Power of the Myth. And in this story, he talks about Indra, king of the gods. Remember that? And then he gives a story where Indra became king of the gods, and then he created this heavenly palace with all of the goods, right? Golden toilet seats, all the food that you can desire, musicians in the court playing your favorite lullabies. And then one day this old monk walks into his court with ragged clothes and an umbrella, it seemed, that was like, I guess, broken in his hand. And as the door opened behind him, there was a long list of ants a long line of ants, I'm sorry, just coming into the court. And then Indra becomes angry, no?
I think it's I think. Right, yeah, he's got a hairy chest, and he plucks. Yeah,
he gets angry. I think Indra gets angry. He's like, "Get out of here, old man," something like that. But then, when the door opens, I remember there was a visualization, a long line of ants coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, to the point, my favorite point. And then Indra's getting very angry and upset, wants to kick out the old man, and is upset that he let all these ants inside of his majestic palace. And then this is the point that always stuck with me. And then the old wise man, I think it was an old monk, says, "You know what those are? Those were Indras before you."
They work through the ranks of spiritual accomplishment.
Uh-huh.
They get to be Indra, be the god of gods, and then they get a big head and grow an ego and blow it and back down to step zero. Yeah.
You could see that same cycle again within a lifetime here in this earth right now. You could see people that grow in some resource and fame and money and power, and then there's this change that occurs, and they no longer remember that they got there because of hard work, but it's people. Money doesn't have wings. Right. People bring you money, right? And then all of a sudden now you don't value people anymore. And then there could be the slippery slope right down to the bottom.
Yeah, so let's do next podcast, Reincarnation, Reincarnated.
Reincarnation, Reincarnated, yes.
Okay, so we'll stop here. I mean, we haven't mentioned, maybe we'll mention next episode, Ian Stevenson, and the various sources.
Thinker type stuff, right. And then
So that's that. Thank you for tuning in. We will be reincarnating again in the same place and a different place. Everything's already changed so drastically since I've sat down in this chair. We will be back next week with a part 2 of the reincarnation discussion and chit chat. Meanwhile, do, if you will, send us questions, topic requests, comments. It's always lovely to hear back from you, see if there's anything specific that struck a tune with you, or that hopefully there's a big cartoon exclamation mark above your head, or a question mark, even better yet. And if there's something that is of interest to you, what would you like to hear us deform and mangle and talk about, and drop us a line. Of course, there's also opportunity, and we are grateful for that, the financial support of the podcast that helps cover the cost of the hosting platform, the website, the et cetera, and maybe if there's when we get to a point where there's some leftover, we could start paying the bills for this equipment that we have here,
spontaneously purchased.
Yes. But yes, so until then, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm MyongAhn Sunim.
From my heart to yours, I'm Dr. Ruben Lambert. Please subscribe and like, and if you like what you hear, pass it on to somebody else. Help us spread the word.